Well, it's noon. Let's start the webinar. First of all, thank you all for joining us in this webinar. We expect this to be an interesting learning experience. We're here with Michael Culligan from HBAN and his team, and so with Orlagh as well, and Sarah. Well, before starting with the presentation from Michael, I will present EBAN. But before that, I would like to let you know that you can participate in the webinar with your questions. So along the presentation, there, as you can see, there is a box where you can add your own questions, and during the Q&A, we will either read those questions, or if you are in the possession of a microphone and a good internet connection, we can plug you in and you will ask your questions yourself. We will try to keep time to make this 1 hour, and if you at any point you have any questions, just send me a private message here. So I will start by briefly presenting EBAN to all those that are less familiar with what we do. First, this is the third of a series of webinars that we have been implementing since January. We want them to continue, and after this webinar, if you have suggestions for other topics that you would like to see covered, don't hesitate to email us and ask them. You are seeing the presentation now? Yes? Okay. So, give me a second. Okay, so EBAN is a not-for-profit organization based in Brussels. We have members all across Europe, and actually this map needs to be updated because recently we have members from Bulgaria as well. And so it's a growing organization. We have members in Europe, but also across the globe to make this a true early stage investment community. Currently we have 111 members. So EBAN is an independent organization, although in the beginning we were supported by Orlagh and the European Commission, but we're totally independent from the European institutions. So who are our members? Business angel networks, federations of business angel networks such as HBAN, our guest today, early stage venture capital funds, individual business angels, business accelerators investing equity, and electronic funding platforms, amongst which crowdfunding platforms, for instance. We also count with a significant number of associate members, which are many other organizations that are not investors, but have a word to say, and they are interested in following this market and contributing to it. So where do we operate? These are our 8 areas of activity. We provide training and learning to our members, and actually these webinars are included in our EBAN Institute efforts to provide additional information to our members. We cannot cover all topics or with the appropriate depth in our annual conferences, so these webinars are a good tool to keep a regular contact with you and give you some additional topics that sometimes we cannot cover in the conferences. EBAN runs statistics on the European markets. Actually, we are currently collecting statistics about angel investments and also other early stage investments in Europe. If by any chance you have not yet participated, we still invite you to go to our website and search in the news the collection of data. One of our most important roles is lobbying. We're in Brussels. There are many policies that are driven from Brussels, and therefore we keep a regular contact with European institutions. And we also try to set up our own papers and position papers and our share our views on the market. We are very focused in increasing the investment capacity of our community, either through training or through access to information, or through any dedicated support that we can provide at the regional level. One of our main tools for this capacity are our annual conferences, the EBAN Congress, which will now take place in May, 19 and 20 of May in Dublin, together with HBAN, and our Winter University, also scheduled to November to take place in Helsinki. So networking is one of the things that you will find in these events that we organize, but you will also find this a good opportunity to meet other investors with whom you can eventually invest in the future. EBAN is also very committed to reach international agreements with other organizations to provide our members and our community with additional information from across the world. So Orlagh will later on give us a little insight of what she's preparing, or we all are preparing for our next Congress in Dublin, so I will not detail too much here. If you don't follow us yet in these social media platforms, feel free to do so. We are on Twitter, and we have a very active LinkedIn group that you can join, and you can feature your own events and news, and you can always receive our monthly flash, which is currently being sent out to 10,000 early stage investment professionals. If you need to contact EBAN, I'm at your disposal, as well as Pablo Garrido, our membership and office manager. Well, Michael, I will load your presentation. The floor will be yours very soon.
Thanks, Luis.
Let me, sorry, I need access to this. Give me a second. Okay, Michael, you can control the presentation from now on. Well, thank you for joining us in this webinar and for bringing us this insight into angel syndication. We're all very curious about it. Please, go ahead.
Thanks, Luis, and good morning to fellow EBAN members. Luis asked us at HBAN if we would share our experience on business angel syndication. So I propose to take approximately 30 minutes to share with you the learnings and the journey we have had. I think perhaps the first thing to say is our experience was, as we went on this journey, that there was not a huge amount of existing supporting documentation in place. So as a result of this, I think we had to create a certain amount of it. And this is why perhaps we've had some learnings. So maybe I'll just go through the agenda first of all.
Can you switch the slide, Michael?
I thought I tried to, but just give me a moment now. Let's see if it is.
I can switch for you.
Okay, yeah, for some reason it didn't. Okay, so what we're going to do is briefly just have a discussion, which is probably important background as to why you might consider a business angel syndicate approach as opposed to perhaps just having business angels in a group but who do their own, who act independently. And I think this is an important background. Then we will share with you the evolution or the journey we have had over the last 2 or 3 years in Ireland with regard to syndicates. And related to that, we will comment on 2 main syndicate structures that have arisen or that we have that we use. In particular then we will have a slightly closer look at what we call a syndicate charter, which is a set of basic rules that a syndicate uses to guide its operation. We will speak briefly about how the syndicate operates and then perhaps just comment on some factors that exist in our local market which have a relevance to our business angel syndicate operation overall. And we will conclude with some of the lessons that we have learned from this journey. Louise, I'm not quite sure why, but okay, I'm not sure if I changed that or you. Okay. Okay, so in terms of why syndicates, I'm conscious that on the call this morning we will have a range of people, some very experienced and perhaps some people a little bit newer to the business angel world. So if I'm covering information you're familiar with, forgive me, but I think it's worth doing so for people that are newer. Most of you will know perhaps there have been 3 main pieces of angel research done worldwide, significant reporting. One was carried out on the west coast of the United States in 2007 by Robert Wiltbank and Warren Boker, and it looked at 3,000 investments and 1,000 exits. There was a second piece of research carried out in the United Kingdom by a group called Nesta. That was called Siding with the Angels. And then in 2011, the OECD carried out a report also, the details of which you can see there. The important thing here, I think, is that there was consistency in the outcome of all these reports. And the main finding was that business angel investing does indeed give a positive return of about 20, 21, 22% year on year. However, there was very much, it was important to look more closely at the detail. And when you do, the research showed that approximately 7% of investments get a 10 times return, which of course sounds very exciting. But when you look more closely, you find that 50 to 60% of investments get less than 1x, which could of course be anywhere from 0 to 1. So naturally, the next thing that the research did was it looked a little bit more closely at the 7% of the investments that do extremely well to explore, what were the factors that impacted, or what were the factors of that success was related to or correlated to. And there were about 6 main factors, and they're detailed there. One, which is very logical, is the idea of a portfolio approach, which is to invest in a range of angel or a range of investments. And you would have the same approach if you were investing in the stock market. I've just returned actually from the Angel Capital Association conference in Washington last week, and perhaps some of you on the call may even have been there. And this message was repeated multiple times from many very experienced business angels. And the message was, if you are investing and you want to succeed, you really do have to invest across a good number of companies, because many of them will not succeed or make the journey, and a small number of them will. So in order for you to make sure that you get or have a better chance of ensuring you have one or two of the winners or the good ones in your portfolio, you need to have the portfolio approach. Period of investment is how long you stay invested in. The domain expertise, the knowledge you have about that particular industry, the amount of due diligence. This can be difficult, of course, because in a startup company, perhaps there isn't a lot of historical financial information, certainly, but of course, perhaps people can do due diligence on the management and on the marketplace, etc. Another factor which may not seem immediately obvious was the entrepreneurial ecosystem, so the level of entrepreneurial activity in the particular region in which you are operating in. And then the level of involvement by the business angel. And this is probably one of the most important factors. And this is the idea, of course, of smart money or a business angel having a hands-on involvement. Now, the research did show, of course, that people who were involved maybe 2 or 3 times a month, as opposed to just being on the board and coming once a month. So those who had a greater involvement had a greater success. However, it also is important to note that it's not, if people get too involved, then they become an executive full-time, and maybe they don't, then they do not have the independence, perhaps. So those who seem to succeed well as business angels were involved 2 or 3 times a month. Now, the reason I go through that background with regard to the research and the factors of success are, if you consider a syndicate, a number of these factors, you have a much better chance of succeeding within a syndicate. So, for example, a portfolio approach will clearly, if you're in a syndicate, you can perhaps invest a smaller amount in a lot more companies. In terms of the domain expertise, again, in a syndicate, because you have more people, it should be possible to have a much broader range or access to a broader range of expertise. And again, on the due diligence, in a syndicate, it should be possible to do more in-depth or more detailed due diligence than you might be able to do if you were on your own. And with regard to the level of involvement, one of the challenges if you're an angel on your own is you perhaps have to be involved in every company, and you really won't have the time. However, if you're in a syndicate, then maybe you will lead one of the investments, and you will be involved in great detail, but you may be invested in 4 or 5 other companies, and maybe one of your colleagues will lead those investments. So our experience is that the factors of success, that some of them can be met very well from within a syndicate. Okay, so in Ireland, maybe just before I start, I want to say what we mean by a syndicate, because the word syndicate can mean different things to different people. When people talk about syndication, for example, in America, and when they refer to syndication, they're talking about different angel groups co-investing together. Or people even use the word syndication to mean bringing together of investment from different sources. So sometimes people would use the word syndication to indicate investment from venture capital and from business angels, etc. And what we mean by a syndicate is a fixed group of people who regularly invest together. So in our experience, the syndicate may have 15 or 20 people. It's not a fund. People do not pre-commit their money. But in each occasion, when there is an investment, people have a choice. And usually you will have 4, 5, or 6 people maybe who will do an investment in a particular case. We started out in Ireland with general technology syndicates. And as time has moved on, we've started to create some what we call, I guess, vertical syndicates. And the initial ones are in food and beverage and also in medtech. If you can support a vertical syndicate, then logically it should be the case that you have a greater level of expertise within that syndicate and therefore have a better chance of succeeding. So if your numbers, if you have sufficient people, and this is a challenge of course, but if you have sufficient people for a vertical syndicate, then we think it's a good way to go. It's evolving here. We have more work to do. The final thing to say, I think, at this stage on that slide is that syndicates are not for everybody by any means. You know, some people would prefer to invest on their own. That's the nature of people. But some people, of course, are open to the syndicates. Okay, I'm going to just talk now about 2 different syndicate structures that we have in use here in Ireland. The first structure, option 1 here, is the main structure that's used. It's used by most of our syndicates. And it's, as we say, a light touch or informal, so reasonably easy to implement and apply. And in this particular case, essentially we have a syndicate agreement and a syndicate charter. We'll talk about the charter a little bit later. The syndicate agreement is an agreement that's signed between the different members in the syndicate. And each time there is an investment, the specific
investors who invest in that deal will sign that agreement. It's important to note that it's not a legal company, or it's not even a legal partnership, because if you have a legal entity, then this brings significant reporting responsibilities and therefore overhead. So there is no corporate structure here. It's really like a club, but the important thing about having the agreement is that we have paperwork which can guide how the members behave when there is an investment. And the syndicate agreement sets expectations as to how members behave. And for example, the syndicate agreement would say something like that the syndicate members who are investing in company A will nominate a lead investor, and that lead investor will be the interface point with the company, and then that lead investor will be empowered to make decisions to the company, but only having had confirmation of those decisions from the other investors. So we don't have time to go into all of the detail in the syndicate agreement here, but it's a piece of paperwork that guides the operation and is signed for each individual investment by the specific investors in that particular case. The charter we will come to in a moment, and then the individual, just to say that in this particular informal or light touch syndicate model, individual shareholder names will appear on the share register and therefore be visible to other people. Okay. We do have a second, much more formal structure, and when we did work, I should perhaps comment, I guess, at the outset, when we started going down this route of syndication, we did look around the world to try and get access to, I guess, you know, pre-existing information, and we found it relatively difficult to do so. And I think we all have to remember, all of us involved in the business angel world, have to remember that it is very, very young in its evolution. And we all, I think we all know that even today, the formal or visible business angel networks only have about maybe 8 or 10% of the business angel activities. So a lot of business angel activities informal or outside of these networks. So perhaps it's not that surprising with a young industry that lots of supporting documentation is still evolving, and I think there will be lots more, you know, development in that regard. Some people like to have a much more formal structure, and this particular structure, perhaps just before I go through it, maybe if I can paint the picture of where it might be suited best. We have one of the syndicates here in Ireland called Irish Investments. You can see the logo on the top right. In this particular syndicate, you have a core group of about 7 people, and these are the core founding members. And in this case, those founding members do most of the work for the syndicate in terms of its operation, in terms of its due diligence, in terms of ongoing interaction with the investee companies. The syndicate also has maybe another 30 members, and these members do not have so much time available. So the model that's in place here is that there is a company limited by guarantee at the center of the syndicate, and that company that's limited by guarantee is owned by the founding members. And so in this case, we're talking about a much more formal structure. There is a corporate entity, and because it's a more formal structure, the result is you need a lot more documentation. So apart from something basic like an application form, which of course you will have in the light touch also, you will also have a power of attorney document, which is something that an individual investor gives authorization to the directors of the membership company to act on their behalf. The membership company acts as a nominee company, and that nominee company does the investment in the companies. So again, the individuals have to sign nominee authorization and indemnity paperwork. The nominee authorization authorizes the directors to act on your behalf through the nominee company, and you also at the same time indemnify them against any wrongdoing. In addition, there are a couple of more pieces of paperwork, such as declaration of trust and an anti-money laundering compliance documentation also. So just continuing, I think I've already mentioned that the company is limited by guarantee. In Ireland, the law states that if a company is limited by guarantee, you have to have a minimum of 7 members. This is something, of course, that may differ in other legal, or may differ legally in other countries. You would have to check this. Our experience here is this is suitable, this particular model, where you have a core group who are almost semi-professional in their business angel activity. In other words, business angel activity is a significant part of their activities overall, because it consumes a lot of time in this regard. So if people are full-time or part-time in business angel activity, then this particular formal structure can be more appropriate. It is important to remember that there is more overhead, and therefore it takes more time. I think I've already mentioned a number of these points already. Individual members, you do retain the beneficial ownership of the shares, and this is a factor that the syndicate found a little challenging, because there is a nominee company, and because the nominee company invests on your behalf, the individual shareholder names were not on the share register. However, it is the case, as I say, that the individual members do retain the ownership of the shares. And okay, so those are the 2 main structures, and of course we would like to have lots of time to go into much more detail on them, and maybe when we get to the question and answer we can cover some specific points that you have. But I think we would summarize the commentary on the main structures by saying that in the majority of cases the informal or light touch syndicate approach works fine, works very well, and is reasonably straightforward from a structure viewpoint. And then the formal one is, as I said earlier, suited if people are full-time or part-time at the business angel investing. The next thing then we want to talk about here briefly is a syndicate charter. A charter, of course, is just a basic set of rules that guides behavior. And by the way, we have a sample charter that we would be happy to share with people. At the bottom of this slide, I have said that if you email my colleague Sarah, we will be happy to send you a sample charter, and that would have more detail. And because of time, I will just go through some of the main points here. Our experience is that a good syndicate should have 3 different subgroups to help it to operate. The first one there is the steering, which is like the operation subgroup, for just keeping the syndicate going on a day-to-day basis. So that would have a chair person for the syndicate, maybe a vice chair for the syndicate, and then there is a whole range of detail with regard to, for example, how you select companies. There will be the responsibility of the steering group, with regard to how you follow back with the companies after presentations, and all the day-to-day operation will be the responsibility of the steering subgroup. There are 2 other subgroups. One is the membership or recruitment subgroup. This is extremely important because experience shows, and again this is a message that was clear from the Congress in America last week, but experience shows that you need to bring new angels onto your syndicates or your groups on an ongoing basis. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's because some people will do a number of investments and maybe they don't have capacity to do more, or maybe they won't do some for a while. It may also be that some people figure out that actually, even though they thought business angel investing was for them, maybe it's not. So all the time, to keep the group fresh, you do need to be bringing some new members on, and that should be the responsibility of the membership subgroup. And the due diligence subgroup is, I guess, straight obvious in terms of its responsibilities. The comment we would make with regard to all three of the subgroups is it's very important that you change the people on these groups from time to time. So maybe it's every 6 months or every year. In particular with something like due diligence, it's important that different people in the syndicate partake in due diligence. One of the key learnings or experiences we have is that there is a danger when you have a group that a small number of people end up doing most of the work. But that's okay in the formal structure, because the formal structure is set up to support that. And in the formal structure, it often is the case that the core members perhaps get some fee for doing the work. But in the informal structure, it's very important that the workload is shared. And the idea of having different subgroups with different people on those subgroups is a way of bringing the people in to do the work. And if you don't share the workload, then eventually those doing all the work will get tired and it will cause a problem for the group. There are a number of other factors which are covered in the charter, things like confidentiality, which is extremely important, because even though you may have individual confidentiality agreements with business angels registered with your angel network, companies will come and present, and it's important that the information is treated by those syndicate members confidentially. And equally, if there are any conflicts of interest, these need to be declared. So these are examples of things that are covered in the charter also. We also refer there to communicating clearly with the entrepreneurs. When you put a syndicate together, the people who are in the syndicate, your reputation is tied, is connected to how you behave and how you communicate. So if you have companies come and present to your syndicate, it's very important whether you have good news or bad news for the company. It's very important that you communicate clearly and in a timely fashion with them. And again, we suggest in the charter that you state specifically what time frame you will revert to the company in. If you do this, it reflects well on the syndicate. It reflects well on the syndicate overall in terms of professionalism for you. We would even suggest that it's a good idea. Sorry, excuse me. We would suggest it's a good idea to publish your charter on your website. And if you do that, then the company dealing with you can see it clearly, how you behave, how expectations are set, and this is, I think, a positive thing for your syndicate in terms of its reputation. And just briefly then, when you have a syndicate, it's very important, obviously, of course, that you have sufficient people attending your meetings. So we suggest that you pre-agree with your fellow members some percentage of meetings that people must attend. And we suggest really that this ought to be about 70% of the meetings should be attended by members, by each member. In addition to that, it's important to set expectations about the level of investment that an angel is prepared to make. Because if you don't discuss this, then maybe you have somebody who can do 200,000 and somebody else maybe who's thinking of 20,000. So in the charter, we suggest that it's specifically stipulated or stated what the minimum investment per investor per deal is. In addition to that, it's also useful to perhaps suggest an average investment level per investor per deal. And this way you can get a sense of, what the average investment per deal from the syndicate is. In our case in Ireland, typically the syndicates are investing about 200,000, and the average investment level per investor per deal is about 50,000. And different syndicates have different minimum investments, varying from maybe 25 to 40 or 50K. Okay, in terms of the syndicate operation, we've already referred to the fact that you would have an application form, you would have the membership charter, which we have gone through, and as I say, you can get a sample charter from us, and hopefully that would be very helpful for you. And then the syndicate agreement itself. I guess the important thing about the syndicate agreement is that it pre-governs how the members operate when a deal is being done and when it's done. Actually, I'm just thinking, with regard to the charter also, and with regard to the discussion we're having here, some of you will know that HBAN put together a guide on business angel investing for angels, and this is published by EBAN and available to EBAN members through the EBAN website. And that has a copy of the charter and other information that we're talking about in there. So perhaps you can refer to that also. Just a couple of other items briefly that are important. An important thing to understand and recognize is that many entrepreneurs, even though they're experienced as business people, will not necessarily be experienced in having investments into their companies. So a lot of time can be taken up by the whole process. So we suggest, if possible, therefore, that you have a sample term sheet, and ideally with explanation notes in very plain language so that it's easy to understand. Also, we suggest a sample due diligence questionnaire. This is something that we have, and some of our syndicates use it, and what they do is the sample questionnaire has many questions in it, but different syndicates then will decide which of those questions are applicable or appropriate for any deal that they're doing. But it's a template that can be used. We also suggest, of course, that depending on your country and the situation, that you also highlight within these booklets the tax incentives that exist to support. A big question that arises just before we finish here on the syndicate structures, etc., is whether or not you should have a membership fee for the individual members. And this will vary depending on your circumstances. In our own situation here in Ireland, where HBAN as an umbrella organization on the island of Ireland has north and south, and HBAN has two roles. One is to raise awareness of business angel investing, and the second is to put in place business angel syndicates. Because we have a specific remit to put in place business angel syndicates, we currently support the syndicates quite closely in terms of their day-to-day operation, and in a lot of the cases would be responsible for sourcing companies for the syndicates and supporting the operation of the meetings, syndicate meetings. However, you may have a situation where you want the syndicates to be a little more standalone in their operation, and over time in Ireland we expect to be a little closer to that also. And if that is the case, then I think it would be appropriate to have membership fees for the members of the syndicates. Some of our syndicates have, some do not. We should also say, of course, that we use the GUST platform for companies registering, and we set up the different syndicates under GUST, and therefore we can refer companies centrally from HBAN to different syndicates. And over time this can become more efficient, because if you have a lot of syndicates and companies register centrally with you, then you can refer the companies to these to different syndicates as appropriate. I'm conscious of time, so we'll be about 5 more minutes, I think. Here we go. Just bear with me. Yes. I just want to maybe make a comment with regard to our situation in Ireland, because it informs to some degree, you know, the, I guess, progress we're making on the business angel arena. In Ireland, if you're a startup company, there is money available directly from the government, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland, although a little bit different in both cases. But for example, in the Republic of Ireland, through the government, through Enterprise Ireland, which is the agency that supports startup companies, typically 250,000 can be invested in a startup company directly. In addition, we also have a range of seed venture capital companies who can invest between 100 and 600,000 in initial funding rounds. Many of them would invest 250,000 also. So a typical situation for a startup company might be that it's raising 750,000, and it would get 250 from the government, 250 from a seed venture capital company, and 250 from the angels. This can work very well together in a co-investment basis, because for the angels, if you have a venture capital company, then usually the venture capital company has the ability to follow on in terms of funding if the company is successful. And also for the seed venture capital companies who are doing a lot of deals, the idea of having the business angel there with expertise can work very well. And this is certainly something that is evolving and changing, because business angel investing is becoming more organized, more structured, and as it is, it's more capable of working well with seed venture capital companies. Whereas I think if you go back a number of years, this perhaps did not work as well together. So I think as time goes on, and of course the VC market is changing and evolving, so as time goes on, in particular in the startup world, I think you're going to see a much, much closer involvement and almost symbiosis or coming together of seed venture capital and angel activity. So I think that situation in Ireland of having public money and private seed money has been very complementary to the business angel activity. And both individual business angels and syndicates regularly invest together with the seed venture capital companies. Okay, so to conclude, I just want to summarize perhaps with a 2 slides. Number 1 is some tips if you're putting together new syndicates. It's very important that you have sufficient members, because if you don't, there will be fatigue or people will get tired quickly. So have sufficient members, have your charter so that people will attend. Choosing the right members, of course, is difficult and requires a lot of work. Our experience is that there is a lot of value in branding the syndicate. So if you give the syndicate a name, and most of our syndicates in Ireland do have brands and names, but if you give them a name, then the ownership for that name and the association with it transfers over time to the members. And if they feel ownership for it, then that's a really positive thing. The single most important word in all of syndicate activity is trust. And building trust, of course, takes time. So if you're putting a syndicate together with people who do not know each other, and this is how we started in Ireland, then you have to work very hard to help these people to get to know each other and to build trust. One of the ways that the people can build the trust is by working in the subgroups we referred to earlier. That is why it's very important to change the subgroups. If you change the subgroups, then people get to work with different people, and over time they get to know them and they build the trust. And what has been very interesting for us to see is people that did not know each other at all, maybe 2 years ago, have now evolved within syndicates to a situation where they have so much trust with other people that if somebody else is investing, then that person will say, well, I will invest because that other person is investing. So that's what comes with trust building. And another comment on that is, of course, if you can find a number of people who already know each other and therefore have trust, this can be a very good way of starting a syndicate and building other people around them, and it can speed up the development of your syndicate. This is very hard work, and therefore, the workload needs to be shared. You expect that some people will drop out, so some people will not, stay with the syndicate. This is exactly the nature of it. And I guess in terms of companies, we would suggest, seeking out promoters who are genuinely open to receiving help. And finally, the lessons we have learned, and of course we are continuing to learn, and we'll learn more learning ahead of us than behind perhaps. Our experience is having the syndicate chair is very important. Now it doesn't have to be that the syndicate chair has to do all of the work. That's not what we mean. But the syndicate chair is important as a figurehead. The syndicate chair is important in giving credibility. The syndicate chair is important in helping to attract new members. And certainly the syndicate chair at minimum, perhaps somebody else from the syndicate, should meet new potential members to ensure that they will be suitable for the group. And when you're doing a deal, the lead angel is so important. And I think this is an area that will receive lots of further discussion in the angel world internationally throughout the next couple of years. But lead angels are pivotal in making it work. We've touched on portfolio approach, set expectations with everybody, including members and including companies. We've covered some of the other stuff. The last 2 points there perhaps, to be patient as syndicates and as investors. When you come together as a syndicate and you're building it, there can be a natural desire to want to do investments. But also you have to just have a degree of patience. And if you're doing the right thing, the investments will come. And the very last point I have there is, and this applies to individual angel investing as well as syndicates, failures will come quickly. Many companies, startup companies don't make it. And if they don't, this can happen quickly. But successes, of course, take longer time. So you might, for exits, maybe it's 5 years or something. But you might have failures within 1 or 2 years. So it's important that people understand this at the outset. And, we touched on this earlier, but listening to the business angels from around the world over a few years now, those who have been around a long time will repeat over and over, have a portfolio approach, be patient, and a small number of your deals should do very well, and that's how you succeed in it. Okay, so with that, it's time to finish on the presentation and maybe hand back to Luis for the moment.
Yes, well,
do a little bit on the European thing in a moment.
Thank you, Michael. I think we ran over a little bit our time. We don't have that much time. Orlagh will give us just a small insight of how this discussion will be continued in our Congress in Dublin. But anyway, please feel free to post your questions because we will still have some minutes for questions. Okay, so Orlagh, can you briefly introduce us to what are you preparing for the European community there? Yes.
No problem. Can you hear me, Luis?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Well, if you could put on the conference website.
Sure.
On the main screen, please.
Here we are. It's loading. Yes, okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to give you an update on our EBAN Congress, which we are hosting here in Dublin on the 19th and 20th of May. As you can see on the website, which is showing on your screens, Ireland is a beautiful place, so we're hoping this will encourage you to come and visit. But specifically, Lewis, if you can scroll down the home page, right down to those 4 buttons, that's where I would recommend that you go online. You click on the green one, obviously, to register, and that will take you right through to the registration process. On the accommodation button, you need to book your accommodation through our conference partners website, because they are hosting and holding all the room rates at our agreed rates that are on the website. And finally, if you just, Lewis, click on the program, that will give you an overview of the program for the 2 days. Specifically, it's going to be opened by Minister Bruton. He is the Minister for Jobs and Innovation here in Ireland. And our keynote speaker on the first morning is Kieran Connell, the CEO of Decawave. Kieran is just finishing a 20 million investment round in total, of which the majority has been backed by business angel investors. We won't go through the whole program now, but again, if you scroll down, Louis, you can see the panels of which will be discussed on the morning. Again, I encourage you, when you're registering, to decide which panel you want to visit and be part of.
And just to highlight that we have a panel dedicated to angel syndicates with some first-hand testimonials. Exactly.
So obviously, that's where we'll be focused on, the angel syndicates, an Irish perspective. And then, Lewis, if you can scroll back to the top of the page again, click on it for attendees. This is just to give you all the information about the conference venue. If you click down on the conference venue, the conference is being held in Dublin Castle. Dublin Castle is pivotal. It's in the centre of the city, in existence since 1204. It actually has the conference site, 2 museums, 2 gardens, and the state apartments. If you are coming to the Congress, I highly recommend that you take a visit around not just the conference site, but also the state apartments. And again, you need to click and organise that tour, because it is only through a guided tour, that you can get access to the state apartments. And finally, again, if you can scroll back, Lewis, sorry, I'm making you go back and forward. For attendees, click on that, about Dublin and Ireland, the 3rd one down.
Here we are.
This will give you just an overview of Dublin. I highly recommend that you look at that Ireland Inspires. For a small country, we have a powerful punch on a global stage, and you'll see that by looking at that video. But also further down that page, if you scroll down, it'll give you all the information about Dublin, tax refunds, insurance, shopping, etc., etc. Scrolling back up, Louis. Final again for attendees.
Yes. Final one, because we need to go to the Q&A.
Yes, the final one. Just explore Ireland.
Explore Ireland, yes.
I not only encourage people to come for the conference and the content of the conference program and all obviously the work we're doing here, but also I'd encourage you to come possibly the weekend before. And this slide gives you an idea of the scenic areas that are in and about Ireland and in and about Dublin. Obviously, any questions?
Okay, so let's move to the questions. Let me open my pane to support here. So I have Gabor willing to make a question. I will give you the grounds. Okay. Gabor, can you speak?
Hello?
Hello, yes, we can hear you well.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
thank you very much for the insightful presentation. I would have a question for the part where you were talking about the more formal syndicate structure, where you mentioned that the members, however, they are However, they are retaining membership. They are not appear on the legal document for the LTD. How is it done? What is the legal setup there, and what are the consequences and risk of doing so? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. There is not a risk associated with it. The structure is that there is a nominee company, and the nominee company is the vehicle or the entity that invests in the company. And therefore, if you look at the share register, you will see, for example, Syndicate nominee company as the shareholder on the public register. But separate to that, there is a relationship and paperwork between the individual members and the nominee company. And that demonstrates or shows clearly the beneficial ownership of the shares for the individual investor. So there is not any risk associated with it. The paperwork covers it completely. But rather than having multiple investors' names and all that goes with that, there is only one shareholder on the share register, and that is the nominee company.
Okay, thank you. I understand. And it holds true for incorporations. Is it also holds true for LTDs? Because there are no shares usually at the LTDs. There is just ownership percentages, right? Or the syndicate appears as a single owner.
The syndicate nominee company appears as a single owner. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabor. Well, we also have Jeanette. Jeanette, you can speak now.
Hello, Jeanette from Connect Sweden here. I have a question regarding the informal syndicate and whether there is an upside somehow for the lead investor, or is it based on pure reciprocity?
Yeah, good day, Jeanette. Nice to talk to you again. This is the answer in our situation so far is there is not an upside for the lead investor. It's a very interesting question. It's something that has been discussed in a lot of detail, and even last week at the conference in America, this discussion was on one of the panels. And you know, the US market obviously is mature a little bit more than Europe, and the conclusion there also was that really it's not practical to have an upside for an individual investor in that informal one. And I think our experience is the following, that if you want to do a number of investments, you would act as the lead angel in one of those investments. And in return for that, somebody else will lead in a number of the others. And that's the reward. Now, however, with regard to your comment with the idea of giving some upside, in the formal syndicate structures, you know, I think as time moves on in the future, and this may happen in the informal, but certainly in the formal in the future, where essentially you have core members who are doing the work, and then you have outer members who are investing and not doing the work. So I think you will see a model, and it already maybe starting to evolve, where core members can get some carry. At the moment what happens is the core members get some reward or get some payment for doing the work on due diligence, etc. But I could see a situation in the future perhaps where the core members are rewarded by getting some carry or some upside on a positive result. But that's not currently the case. And certainly to answer your question specifically, in the informal case, no.
Okay, we try to make an informal agreement where there is an upside for the lead investor, because it's very hard to find the perfect reciprocity, especially if you have a quite big business angel network. But of course, the upside is only if there is an upside. Otherwise, there is of course nothing.
Yes, and if you bear in mind the discussion we have had, which really is that only one in so many will succeed, and if you're only leading one, you will only lead 1 in every 5 or 6 deals you're involved in. So I don't think it's as straightforward, but I mean, the intention is good, but I think the execution can be
It's a difficult issue.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you, Michael. See you in Dublin.
Look forward to that.
Thank you, Jeanette. Well, we don't have further comments for the questions. Do you want to draw a final remark, a final comment before we turn off the webinar? Michael.
Okay, Louise and fellow EBAN members, thanks for the opportunity of having a brief discussion this morning. As I said earlier, if you want a copy of the charter, you can email my colleague Sarah. The email is in the presentation there. In addition to that, we will be, Orlagh has highlighted the Congress to you. We will of course be discussing syndication among many other topics at the Congress, and we would be really delighted and thrilled if you can join us in Dublin for the EBAN Congress, where we hope to have a very important event for all EBAN members, and you know, the networking and learnings that can come together are very important. So hopefully you can join us in Dublin, and we thank you for your time this morning.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Orlagh. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and see you in our next webinar. Bye.
Thanks, Louise.